Hi, this is PG of PG's Lumacy. In this tutorial, we will be making the updated version of the Spider-Man figure on the Rainbow Loom. The colors of bands that we will be using for this project will be red and blue, and for the eyes we will be using white and dark gray bands. And if you are doing the optional emblem or logo on Spider-Man's chest, you will be using black bands as well. And you will be needing beads for that part. And to thread the beads with rubber bands, I use this kind of floss. It is a threader floss that is used for dental bridges and braces. Of course, you will use the loom and the hook. You could use the plastic hook that came with the original Rainbow Loom kit. But for projects like this that use double bands and sometimes even triple bands, a metal hook would be better. You will be using toothpicks to secure the pieces that you are setting aside for a while. And those are the things that you need to complete this project. It's been a while since I posted my very first action figure tutorial for the Rainbow Loom, and it was the Spider-Man figure. I have learned a lot of good techniques since, and I've also learned a lot from the comments that I got on that video. Now with the new movie coming out, I decided to go back to the drawing board and come up with an updated version of the figure and of course an updated video. So here goes. Our first step will be to make the arms for the figure. And we will be using the loom in its standard offset configuration, which means that the pins will be staggered. And make sure that you have your arrow pointing downwards or pointing towards you. And we will be placing the bands from the top going to the bottom. And then, unless otherwise specified, we will be using double bands for each placement. Take note of the colors that we use for each placement. To start off with the arm piece, let us place 2 bands on these center top pins. Next, another pair of red bands on this pair of right pins. Our next placement will use 3 bands. And we place it on these pins. Next will be 2 blue bands. And then another 2 blue bands. And again, we place 3 red bands on the next row. We will add a capping band on this pin, and it will be looped 3 times on this pin. 1, 2, and 3. So this is the layout for the arm piece, and now we are ready to loop it. So go into the capping band and grab the 3 bands that are underneath. You might want to hold on to the capping band and get the bands out of the pin and loop to the forward pin. Now let's loop these blue bands and the next blue bands. And when you get to this group of bands, these are 3 bands, instead of looping to this pin, we will loop to this pin. So we grab all 3 bands, get them out of the pin, and then loop them to this pin in the center. And then from there, we will loop these bands and these bands. That is the looping for the arm piece. And now to set aside this piece as we prepare one more arm piece and the main body, we secure the top loops with a toothpick and then pull the entire arm piece out of the loom. And this is your arm piece. You will need to make one more for the other arm. After making 2 arm pieces, set them aside while you work on the main body. Now let us place the bands for the main body. Take note of the placement of the bands and the color of bands that we are using at each placement. And like I said, unless otherwise specified, we will be using 2 bands for each placement. Let us start with the top center pins using red bands. Then red for this band, placed diagonally from the top center pin to the second pin from the top on the right. And let's do that on the other side. Now let us place a row of bands on this section. We'll be using red double bands. Next, for this center section, we will place double bands. And for the chin area, we will be placing double bands diagonally from this left pin to this center pin. And we'll do that on the other side as well. Okay, note that I'm pushing down on my bands so that it'll be easier to loop them later. Let us add the neck part. For the neck part, we will be using 3 bands, red bands. Now let us work on the upper body, the chest area. We will first add the shoulder areas, the shoulder pieces, 2 bands diagonally from this left pin to this center pin. And we will do that on the other side as well. Now let us add a row of red double bands on these pins. Next, we will place blue double bands on this side. And we will do that on this other side as well. These are blue double bands. For the center pin, we will be using red. Moving on to the next row, let us place a row of red double bands. Then let us add a row of blue double bands. Working on the leg section now, we will be adding a chain of 3 double blue bands to this band over here. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Let's do that on this other side as well. Now to add the boot part, okay, we'll be using red bands. Okay. Place 3 red bands on this bottom pins. And let us prepare the extension for the boots on this section of unused pins. 2 bands on these pins. 3 bands on the next row of pins. And we will cap these bands with a capping band looped 3 times on the pin. 1, 2, and 3. We will loop these bands, starting with the capping band. It is a triple looped band. We go into the capping band, get the 3 bands out of the pin and loop them to the forward pin. Okay. And then get the double bands and loop them to the forward pin. Now get these bands out of the loom and place them, move them to this bottommost pin on the right. Let us work on this other side. Let us add our 3 bands to this bottom pair of pins, and then we will prepare the extension piece on these pins as well. 2 bands, 3 bands next, and then cap with a triple loop band. 1, 2, 3, and then we loop. Get this piece off the loom and move it to this pin. So this is the layout we have so far. You might want to pause the video to make sure that you have the same layout. Now let us add horizontal bands that will hold the bands together and also define the shape for our figure. And our first horizontal band will be on these pins. It will be a double loop band. To form a double loop band, you twist a band to form a figure 8. You fold it to itself. That forms the 2 loops or the double loops. And place it on the pins. Let's add another double loop bands on these pins. And we move to the chest area. where we add just a single band, no looping, and we'll place it on this row of pins. Next, on these pins, we will add what I call a 1.5 loop band. And to do that, let's press on these bands. You place a single band on all 3 pins, and then on one end you twist it, and then you loop it back only to 2 of the pins, which are these pins. So it is looped 1.5 onto these pins. That's why I call it a 1.5 looped pin. And then for the next row, we will add a blue double loop band. Okay, again, you twist to form a figure 8, you fold to itself, and then you place it on the pins. And to get ready for looping this entire figure, let us add the arm pieces. To add the arm pieces, I turn the loom horizontally, and we grab the arm pieces that we made. Let's work on one of the arms. Now it's easier to place the loops for the arms like so. Just place them on these 2 pins. But the end result will be a flat looking, unnaturally wide arm, especially the biceps area. So what I do is that I place one of the loops from this band on this pin, and I place the other end or loops on this pin. Okay, I do that for the other bands as well on the other side. I grab one of the pair of loops and place it on this pin, and grab the other set of loops and place it on this pin. And for a more natural look, I will push this end or loops of the band this way, and I will push the ones underneath this way for a more natural looking arm. Okay, I would say this would form the armpits, and we don't have our armpits pointing upwards, so that's the reason why we need to push these loops up and these loops down. Let's do that again on the other side. So this is now the layout with the horizontal bands and the arm pieces placed on the layout. You might want to pause the video and make sure that you have the same layout. It's time to start looping the bands, and we will start with the leg pieces. Let's work on one of the legs. You go into this extension piece and then grab the bands underneath and loop these bands to the forward pin, and then looping forward or upwards. Let's do that again on the other side. Let us loop the upper body, starting with the center bands. If you are placing the optional emblem or logo on Spider-Man's chest, then we will move to method 2 for this. If not, then you will proceed to the usual looping pattern for this. I have always wanted to put the Spider-Man emblem on my action figure, and I came up with this idea using beads and bands to form the spider, and I'm presenting it here for those who would like to try it. It's a rather intricate procedure, but I want to give it a try. I'm using two seed beads of different sizes. One is smaller and the other one's bigger. Every time I go to the craft stores now, I would go to the bead section and I would buy different size beads for eyes and other features on my action figures. So you might want to visit the bead section in your craft store the next time you visit. I use a floss, a piece of floss to thread and string my beads. Insert the floss into the smaller bead and then get your band onto the floss and then reinsert the floss into the bead like so. Okay, it will form a loop that will pull your band into the bead. Okay, like so. Okay, and then you could pull out the floss and try to get the bead onto the middle, okay, of the band. Now we will insert the ends of this band into the bigger bead. And to do that, once again, I grab my floss and then insert its end into the bead. And then I grab one of the ends of the band and then I reinsert my floss into the bigger bead, forming that loop, and I pull that end of the band into the bead. So now I have one end of my band into the bead. To do that for the other side, I go in the opposite end, opposite direction, and this time I insert my floss into the this other end of the bead. Okay, might want to pull on the band so it'll give you some space for the floss. Okay, and then I grab the other end of the band and then reinsert my floss. Okay, and that forms a loop that pulls the other end of the band into the bead. Okay, and then I pull out the floss. So what I have now are the two ends of my bands. Okay, just pull bit by bit. So I have my band holding on to the beads like so. So that might be hard to understand because of the size of the bead. So what happened was we inserted our band into this smaller bead and then reinserted it to this bigger bead, and the end got out this way. Okay, and then we also inserted it on one end of the bead and then reinserted it to the bigger bead, and it came out this way. So our single band first went into this smaller bead, and then we inserted it into the bigger bead, forming this loop. That's this, and then forming these outer loops. And these are the loops that are formed. So I hope that helps you sort of imagine what we did with this bead. Okay. For the other band, it's simpler. We are inserting a single band onto this loop over here. Okay. So we will just insert it into this loop, and that would be this loop over here. So let's do that. And here, this is where we want it to be. Okay. This is where we want our band to be, not here, okay, but in between these two bands. Okay. So we're going in there. Okay. Let's do that with the floss. Okay, so you see that? I've inserted the floss, and then I get the band in there, and then reinsert it. There we go. Okay, so now we pull, and then we get the floss out, and we have our two bands in place. Okay, when you have this band in place, you could pull on these lower bands and you will have this piece for the emblem. We will be using a different looping sequence if we are including the emblem in our figure. And we will also have to hold off on attaching the arms. So for the looping, when you get to this blue section over here, that's where it differs from the design without the emblem. Loop the middle bands up to this section at the base of the neck. Okay, let's do that. Then we have to take this pair of bands off the loom. Don't worry, they'll stay here, and do that on the other side as well. Okay, now the top of our emblem piece is the smaller bead, and the bottom, of course, is the bigger one. So we will have these bands go into these top loops. Okay, let me pull these out, and then I will get my hook into this top loop, get those bands and get them into my loop, and then put the bands back on the pin. Let's do that on the other side. Get these bands off the pin, get my hook into this loop, get my red bands, and then get them into the black loop, and then onto the pin. There you go. So that's what we did. We got our top black loops. Okay, we got our black loops onto these shoulder bands. Okay. And then for the bottom loops, we are getting them onto these pins. This one over here, and this one over here. Okay. Now we want this side of the band to go onto this pin, and this one onto this pin. And we also want this side, this bottom one, not this one, but this one on the bottom, we want it to go onto this pin. And on the other side as well, want it to go onto this pin. Okay, and then these bands that we took off, we can now put them back. Okay, and put them back. Okay, get the body of the spider, the bead, to the middle. Okay, now let's loop. Okay, these red bands. Okay. Now before you loop these blue bands, you will have to add the arm pieces. So go back to that section if you wanted to review how to attach the arms. We have attached the arms, and now we could loop these blue bands. And then again, don't forget these red bands underneath the arm pieces. So go into all those bands and then grab the red bands underneath, get them out of the pin, and loop the forward pin. So getting these bands, go into, grab, and out, and onto this forward pin. Okay, then grab the shoulder pieces. From here, the looping will be the same as in the first method, and you will see that in the rest of this video. If you skip the emblem part of the design, then you will continue looping the side bands. You have already looped the center bands, so let's go to the side bands. Okay. And make sure you don't forget to loop these bands. They're hidden from view, and my common mistake when I do my figures is forgetting to loop these bands. So go into all these bands and grab the double bands underneath and loop to the forward pin, and then loop the shoulder bands. Okay, let's do that on the other side. Whether you are doing method 1 or method 2 for the chest area with or without the emblem, from the base of the neck upwards, the looping will be the same. So let us loop the rest of the bands. We're grabbing the neck bands this time. Okay, there are 3 of them, so make sure you get all of them. And then the chin bands. Grab the bands that are on top, and that would be these bands on the left. You see the neat teardrop shape. It tells you that you loop the right bands. Now when you get to the top, make sure that you loop this center band last. Do the diagonal bands on the sides first. That makes for a rounder top of the head. Okay, and then do the center bands. So this is how your layout will look like after you have looped the bands. Check to make sure that you did not miss any of the bands. It's easier to redo your work when the bands are still on the loom compared to when they are already off the loom. Grab a single band and get your hook into all the top loops. Get the single band into those loops. Tie a knot and secure. And you are now ready to pull this entire piece off the loom. Pull this band back like so, and then stretch out your piece in different directions. Okay, sideways. Okay, Then for the boots, you want them to be pointing front. So you put an angle to them. Like instead of being straight like this, you pull this piece to the front and you will have your boots. If you wanted these arms to be pointing downwards instead of being raised like this, you could pull these pieces outwards a bit and your arms will go downwards. Okay. Use a pair of tweezers to pull out these ends of the bands, and they will point more naturally downwards. So just keep on stretching, massaging. That's how it kind of feels. Pressing until you get the shape that you desire. Let's add the eyes to our figure, and I'm using white bands and dark gray bands. I place the white band inside the black band like so. You can pull or stretch out the gray band a little bit so it'll be slightly bigger than the white band, and your white band will fit inside of it. Okay, and you will get this. Now we will be placing these bands on the face section or the head section. And the first thing we do is to get our hook into these pieces over here, these top pieces over here. So, because that's where we will hide the sides of the band. So get your hooks into these bands. Okay. And into there are two bands here. We are only getting it into one of them. Okay, so the bands on the sides and into this band over here. Then we grab one of our white and gray bands and carefully pull them into those bands. Okay. Make sure you get two of them in, and you pull them out the back. Okay. And be very careful in pulling them. We don't want them to be stretched out. We want them to retain their natural shape. We don't want them stretched out, but we want the white band in the inner part and the gray band in the outer part. So if they get twisted, just use a pair of tweezers or your hook to get them into position. You want the white band on the inside and the gray band on the outside, because that will create our effect for the eyes. Okay. Okay, that's what we want, for the white to be in the gray. Okay. Let's do that again. On the other side, we are working on these bands. We're going into these bands and this one, but not this one. Okay, so let's do that. Go into these bands with your hook. Okay, and then into this one, but not its pair. Okay, and then you grab the other white and gray band combination and then get them into those bands. Again, we want the white one to be on the inside, so we okay. And we don't want them to be stretched. We don't pull as much as possible, keeping their natural shape. Okay. So when you get that, you could fine tune the shape later. Okay, so when you get that, we are now ready to secure our pieces into the middle section of the face. And this time, we are inserting our hook again from the back. We are aiming for the bottom of this loop over here. Okay, we are aiming for that, and we're going into that section over there, and we go out that section in the front of the face. Okay, and then we insert our hook into one side, one set of eyepieces. Then we grab a dark gray band, and this we stretch out so it'll be thinner and more manageable. Okay, and so we get that stretched out band onto the hook, and we pull it in. Okay, and into these bands until we get it out the back. Okay, make sure you're pulling only on that gray band. See, it's out there on the back, and make sure it doesn't come out of those loops for the eyes. Okay, might want to put a toothpick or something to hold it while you're working on the back side. And on the back side, you grab a C-clip and you secure that end with a C-clip, just so it doesn't get undone. And by the way, if you wanted these other ends of the eyepieces secure, you could put a toothpick through them just so they don't get undone, and add more to your work. Okay, so this is secure with a C-clip. Let us now work on the other side. Okay, again, from the back side, we reinsert our hook where this band is at. We reinsert our hook into that section, and then it comes out in the same section out front. Okay, and then we insert it into the other eye pieces or eye bands, and this time we get the other end of the loop. We can take the toothpick out now. Okay, we get that into our hook, and then pull that band into the eye pieces, and then pull it into that section where the hook came out from, and then pull it to the back section. and then secure with the C-clip. So this band, this gray band, is now secured with a C-clip, and it's holding on to our eyepieces. And before fine-tuning the shape for the eyepieces, secure the ends, which are now on the toothpick, secure them with the same C-clip that is securing the other band. Okay, so get the toothpick out and secure these pieces. Okay. And now we can fine-tune the shape of the eyes. We want our eyes in sort of a teardrop shape, pointing to the side and upwards. We want the white to be on the inside and the dark gray to be on the outside. And we want it to have a neat teardrop shape. And keep on fine-tuning until you get the desired shape. Just as an added feature, I would like to place a waistband on this section over here. And what I do is I pick the smallest bands in my stock, because sometimes the bands get stretched out, or in production there are bands that are naturally bigger than the others. So I pick the smallest bands that I have. I need 3 of them, and I use these for my waistband. And when I put them into the figure, I make sure that I don't stretch them out a lot. So I'm very careful not to stretch them out, because I wanted them to hold on to the waist area. Okay, I don't pull on them as much. Okay, and put them together, form the waistband. Kind of gives our figure a better look. Let me show you the 3 versions of the Spider-Man figures we have right now. This is from the original tutorial. This is the updated version without the emblem. And this is the updated version with the emblem on its chest. So there you have it. The amazing Spider-Man made on the Rainbow Loom.